Mr. Speaker, navigating this world requires cool heads. It defies simplistic answers and knee-jerk judgments. We don't pretend we can fix every global problem, but we can carve a unique path through these dangerous times to secure and renew Britain in an era of global instability. That's what our plan for change is all about, putting Britain's national interest first. After years of economic chaos, we've delivered economic stability for the British people. After years of our armed forces being hollowed out, we're building up our military, firing up our industries, leading in NATO, supporting Ukraine, keeping Britain safe. After years of fraying alliances, we're rebuilding them and shaping them to serve the British people. Focused every ounce of our global influence to deliver for working people, to deliver it in the national interest. And I commend this statement to the House.
Leader of the Opposition, Kemi Badenoch.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. And I thank the Prime Minister for advance sight of his statement. He has evaded Prime Minister's questions for 2 weeks. Only to come back here to tell us what we already heard on the news. This is a weak statement from a weak Prime Minister, which can be characterised in 2 words: noises off. In his statement, the Prime Minister said, "We urge Iran and Israel to honour the ceasefire." He said, "We are using every diplomatic lever to support this effort." What diplomatic levers? Are they the same levers he's using with his backbench rebels? Is he just asking them to please play nice? Let's be honest, Mr. Speaker. Nobody cares what this Prime Minister thinks, and why should they, when he doesn't even know what he thinks, and clearly no one cares what he thinks because he was not involved. We used to be a strategic player on the global stage, Mr. Speaker, advancing Britain's interests with confidence.
Order, order. You may not wish to hear the Leader of the Opposition. I do. Can I just say, it doesn't do anybody good in this chamber to try and shout somebody down who's speaking. Kemi Badenoch.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. They can shout as much as they like, but we all know the truth. We used to be a strategic player on the global stage, advancing Britain's interests with confidence, and now we are on the sidelines. Over the last few weeks, historic events unfolded in the Middle East, and at every stage, Britain has been out of step with the US and out of the loop with Israel. Last week, the Prime Minister came back from the G7, insisting that there was nothing that President Trump said that would indicate he was about to get involved in this conflict. Days later, the US launched its attack on Iran's nuclear facilities. He had no idea what was going on. The week before, Israel launched an attack on Iran, and it became apparent that the UK was not even informed about the attack in advance, despite us having been involved in previous preventative action. How is this standing up on the world stage? On Tuesday, the Foreign Secretary, a lawyer, repeatedly could not say whether the US strikes against Iran's nuclear facilities were legal. This is a government that doesn't know what it's doing. Let me make the Conservative position clear, Mr. Speaker. Iran has been a direct threat to the UK for years, plotting terrorism on British soil. It must not get nuclear weapons. And this is a time for Europe to step up, and the UK should be leading. Instead, we have an Attorney General using international law to constrain and restrict the UK while the Prime Minister hovers indecisively on the sidelines. What we need is a leader. Instead, we have 3 lawyers. Last week, I wrote to the Prime Minister about how this conflict has underscored the folly of the government's £30 billion Chagos surrender deal. The Diego Garcia base is of obvious strategic importance for conflicts in the Middle East. They're shaking their heads. They don't understand. It is obvious. It was used extensively. Diego Garcia was used extensively during the war in Afghanistan, including by the United States. And at Prime Minister's questions, the Prime Minister said that this Chagos surrender had been opposed by our adversaries, Russia, China and Iran. Since then, it has been widely reported that China have offered massive congratulations on the deal and conveyed that it fully supports Mauritius. So can the Prime Minister now admit that he was incorrect to state on the floor of this House that China opposes the Chagos deal? And can he confirm if he still views China as an adversary? Under the terms of his deal, if the US were to launch an attack from the military base on Diego Garcia, we would have to inform the Chinese allied Mauritius government. Will he abandon the deeply flawed surrender deal? Because if not, when will he introduce the legislation setting out the details of the Chagos surrender so Parliament can consider and debate it? We welcome the announcement that the UK will be buying F-35A fighter jets, and I'm pleased that the Labour Party has now moved on from its previous position where it did not support NATO and advocated against the nuclear deterrent. They pretend that it never happened. We have the receipts. Conservatives are proud of exceeding the NATO baseline of 2% of GDP on defence, and we led NATO in getting there. But the government's aspiration to get spending on national security to 5% is just hope. The reality is Labour does not have a plan to get to 3%. It is all smoke and mirrors. And we do not know what the government will spend this extra 1.5% component on. So can the Prime Minister confirm whether this is money that we are already spending or whether there will be any new money? Because so long as this plan remains unfunded, these are just words. Instead of using smoke and mirrors to inflate defence spending, Labour should heed our call to hit 3% by the end of this Parliament with a fully funded plan to get there. You look at the money they claim they're going to save with their welfare bill. 5 billion is nowhere near the tens, if not hundreds of billions that we're going to need to find to meet this defence spending target. And this is the problem, Mr. Speaker. It is one thing to talk about spending money on planes and infrastructure, making announcements about reviews, but it is another to be clear where the money comes from and how it will be spent efficiently to secure the defence of our nation. They can mutter all they like. We all know that they are terrified of doing anything that is even remotely difficult. Mr. Speaker, it is crucial that there is a clear, united front in full support of Ukraine which secures peace on their terms. The stakes could not be higher. We need the government to be leveraging British influence in every way it can for Ukraine. So can he tell us whether he pushed for clearer language in the NATO communique about Russia being the aggressor in this conflict? And can he update us on the UK's current position on Ukraine's accession to NATO, given the absence of detail in this year's communique? We must ensure our leading role continues, but this requires strong leadership and an ability to influence. Mr. Speaker, in conclusion, the Prime Minister may have finally returned to this House after a fortnight away, but in truth, he is all at sea. Irrelevant on the world stage, impotent in the face of rising illegal immigration, and now with 126 of his own MPs all openly undermining his authority, his government is incapable of making even the smallest changes to bring down the cost of our ever-expanding welfare bill. There is no way they're going to be able to pay for our defence. This is a government that is paralysed by its own legal advice, paralysed by its rebellious backbenchers, and paralysed by the fear of being found out for having no real vision for this country.
Prime Minister. Can I say to those who were late in, please don't stand. Prime Minister.
Mr. Speaker, we live in more volatile times than many of us can remember, with conflicts in many parts of the world that are evolving in a very fast and dangerous way. There's never been a more important time to work with our allies and to be absolutely serious in our response. That response was unserious. Unserious. To suggest at a time like this that the Prime Minister attending the G7 summit and the NATO summit is avoiding PMQs is unserious. What happened at NATO yesterday was historic. It was very important at a time like this that NATO showed unity and strength with a commitment to the future, not just to the past. That took a huge amount of work with our allies over the last few days and weeks. We have been centrally involved in that, crafting the final outcome, and we were recognised as having done so. I'm proud that we helped put that summit into the right place yesterday, and the world emerged safer as a result. And that was the unanimous view of 32 allies leaving NATO yesterday. For the leader of the opposition to belittle it just shows how irrelevant she and the party opposite are becoming. They used to once be serious about these issues. They used to be capable of cross-party consensus. And all of that is slipping away. We have led on Ukraine, 3 trade deals, and she talks about the prospect of US attack. She must have overlooked the fact that on Tuesday, when I returned from the G7, the first thing I did was go straight into a COBRA meeting to plan for all contingencies, including a possible US attack on Iran. And I'll tell her why I did that, although we did offer a Privy Council briefing, so she knows this. We have military personnel co-located in nearly all the bases across the Middle East. And therefore, I was extremely concerned to ensure that immediately on my return, I took every step to ensure I had the highest levels of assuredness that we had the preparations in place to keep our people and our assets safe should the need arise. So far from being blindsided, we were planning through last week. We were talking to the Americans. We were put on notice about everything that they did. She simply doesn't understand the nature of the relationship at that level. In relation to Diego Garcia, let me disabuse her. We do not have to give Mauritius advance notice under the treaty. That is absolutely clear. And she talks about defence spend. We are the party that has increased defence spend to the highest level since the Cold War, 2.5%. They talked about it. We did it. And Mr. Speaker, she says we don't know where the money is coming from. She was pressed on this in an interview not so long ago, and this was her quote. She said this, Mr. Speaker, we talked about getting to 3% by 2030, and we couldn't make the numbers work, she said. And then she goes on, we need to find a way to make the numbers work. I was intrigued by this interview. I thought she was about to lay it out. Then she goes, quotes, this sort of thing requires real thinking. And then she said, let's start looking at what we can do. It's about setting up task forces. Mr. Speaker, that's how unserious they are. She asked about the Ukraine communique. As she will know if she'd actually studied this, the way that NATO works is an iterative process. And therefore, the position on Ukraine has not changed for NATO, and it's not changed under this government. On the contrary, we're recognised as leading on Ukraine, the closest ally of Ukraine, working with them the whole time. That is something I'm proud of. I think it's something the House is proud of, because we have been doing this on a cross-party basis across the House, and the sooner we get back to that, rather than the unserious response of the Leader of the Opposition, the better.